Shuly Rubin Schwartz is a scholar of American Jewish history, a visionary institutional leader. She was the dean of, is the dean, are you still the dean? Okay, was the dean of two schools, which most recently was provost of the seminary. And she has the first woman to serve as the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary since its founding in 1886. Now, I'm going to just quickly go through just a few bio statements because she's heard this a lot. And you know, I mean, we know that this is an accomplished person, but I want to get to the important point here quickly. But I will say that she is a graduate of Barnard College, as well as the Jewish Theological Seminary, where she got her degree in Jewish history, or PhD in Jewish history. She was the dean of the Albert A. List College of Jewish Studies, which is JTS's undergraduate dual degree program with Columbia University and Barnard College. She did that from 1993 to 2018, and in 2010, while serving still as the dean of the undergraduate school, she was also appointed the dean of the Gershon Kext Graduate School, a post that she retained while she was a provost as well. As a third generation JTS graduate, Shuly is the wife of a late JTS ordained rabbi and a good friend, Gershon Schwartz, Zichrono Livracha. She's the mother of a son who was an ordained rabbi from Jewish Theological Seminary, and her father was a rabbi from the Jewish Theological Seminary. She received, she's the chancellor, as we all know, and you can tell from her background that this is a woman who has spent an enormous amount of time, you might say almost her entire life, at the seminary, and was a logical choice to take up this position. But that's her academic background. That's some of the things that she's done. She's accomplished a great deal, but I think that her greatest resume comes from the students and the people that she's been in touch with. And I just want to share one note on a personal level. When I came to the seminary, I started my rabbinical school education at the old University of Judaism in Los Angeles in 1972. And in 74, I continued it at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And my former wife and I had a small child of 1 year of age. We didn't know anybody, and we were living right across the street from the seminary in 3111, which was the old, Carol, and you're shaking your head, maybe you know this too, the old Juilliard Apartments, I think is what they called it. But it was most noted for the fact that it was right where the subway comes above the ground. So you heard every subway train. One of the first people that we met was in the seminary synagogue on Shabbat. In those days, the seminary synagogue had separate seating, women on one side, men on the other. And my wife would be sitting on her side with a small 1-year-old child. And there she met Shuly Schwartz. Shuly was an undergraduate at the time at Barnard, and she and Gershon became good friends of ours over those years. And it's been a real treat watching her grow, but an even greater treat watching her touch the lives of students. 18 years later, my daughter Ronit, that same 1-year-old, would attend Barnard College and the Jewish Theological Seminary. And the dean of the undergraduate school, the newly appointed dean at the time, was Shuly Schwartz. And Ronit, who probably didn't remember her at 1 year old, became endeared to her. She, in fact, in my own daughter's words, contributed a lot to changing her life during those important years. My daughter's experience, my experience is the same experience hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't know, of students over the years have had with Chancellor Schwartz. She's not just a good administrator. She's not just a good professor. She's not just a bright and capable and academically qualified scholar. She's a mensch. And that qualification, more than any other, makes her the sort of person who is going to certainly build the kind of seminary, continue to build upon the foundation that has been set. So it's a real thrill for me personally to introduce her to you. And I know you'll find her warm and welcoming. And God willing, as a result of this visit, hopefully many of you who are watching this will know how important the Jewish Theological Seminary is to the growth of Judaism in America. So it's with a great deal of pleasure I introduce Chancellor Shuly Rubin Schwartz.
Thank you so much for that very warm introduction. It's a special pleasure for me as well to, to think about you and your family. Yes, you were the slightly older couple that that we met when we were so young, and my late husband and I learned a lot from you as well, not only as friends a little farther along on the professional journey, but also as young parents, since that was would that would not follow for quite a number of years for us. But it was great. It was the first time I had ever seen a baby swing was in your apartment.
God
So,
bless the baby swing.
and you loved it, I know. And my hyperactive firstborn never stayed in that swing for more than 2 minutes. So,
Yeah.
so it's really it's great to be here. It's great to be with all of you. I, of course, wish I were there with you on the west coast of Florida. I do frequent that area. I was there it's just a year ago that I was there last before the pandemic, visiting my father-in-law and brother-in-law and sister-in-law in Tampa. And that's what I would have been doing, staying with them, or maybe coming down to speak today and then spending Shabbat with them. We're together on Zoom, but I'm still sad we're not face to face. I hope someday that will happen. And just thinking about all that we are missing now as we are a good 10 months into this pandemic. The social connections that we miss, the friends that we would chat with casually in the supermarket, at the hairdresser, at Kiddush, in the synagogue. I know that you, like I, are grateful for opportunities like this one, the opportunity to keep up with our deeper friendships over Zoom and through socially distant visits. But I think each time we do this, it also reminds us of what we're missing, the inability to interact freely with the friends and people we love. All our assumptions about life as we know it have been called into question by this pandemic. I hope that many of you have been vaccinated or are in the process of being vaccinated, but even so, we remain concerned about our health and those of our loved ones. And so much still feels very broken in this world. We have a long way to go before we restore our sense of normalcy. And of course, I took on the role of chancellor in the middle of this pandemic. I guess I can say that at least I knew what I was getting into, but none of us really knew. None of us could have really anticipated the challenges that COVID-19 has posed to higher education and to Jewish institutions. I remember last March when, over the course of a weekend, I, as the provost, had to tell the faculty that by next week we all had to start teaching remotely. And we didn't really know what that meant at the time. If you'll recall, we thought maybe a couple of weeks we might have to do this. We had no idea just what we were up against. We had to figure out how to study together, how we could forge community together. How could we fulfill our highest aspirations as a learning community when we had to do everything from a distance? Thankfully, we learned a great deal. We learned that we could indeed do all of these things, that we can forge meaningful connections, even virtually, and that we can even form community and strengthen our communities in this way. The teaching that we did on a kind of emergency basis last March, we then really put a lot of resources into helping our faculty not only do so in a triage manner, but to do so planfully and excellently. And we're now into our spring semester, having had a very successful fall semester, and really learning just what we are capable of doing in this way. Nevertheless, we long for vibrant in-person community that is central to JTS's vitality. We also have a gorgeous new campus that has been completed, but with only a handful of students and faculty filling our hallways, its potential has yet to be realized. So I hope someday to be able to greet many of you in this beautiful new space when it becomes safe to travel again. But for now, we are so grateful that we have the technological tools to share our teaching and to learn it together with audiences and opportunities such as this one. So what have we learned these past months about how to sustain ourselves? I've drawn sustenance from the richness of our tradition. I've learned so much from our ancestors about how to sustain and cultivate community. For centuries, as we know, Jews have traversed the globe, and the Jewish people have figured out how to maintain and even strengthen communal ties and Jewish commitments, both in calm periods as well as under the most adverse circumstances. As a Jewish people, that trait is part and parcel of our story. Our people emerged from the trauma of uprooting and slavery. We're just reading that these chapters in the Torah at this time of year. Jacob and his family had to leave Canaan and travel to Egypt to find sustenance in a time of famine. The Israelites were then enslaved. Thankfully, our people experienced the exhilaration of freedom and settlement in Eretz Israel. But later, the Jewish people faced the loss of the temple. Over the centuries, we know Jews have faced insecurity in areas where they could not own land, where they faced expulsion, and ultimately where they faced genocide. These stories of sufferings and loss, as well as those of joy, gratitude, and resilience, are reflected in our liturgy, our poetry, our sacred and popular texts, in our ceremonial art, rituals, songs, in our collective story. In times of calm, Jews find creative ways in which to breathe new life into our traditions, even as they preserve them. I think of the Jews of the Golden Age of Spain, who honed their skills of composing gorgeous liturgical poems in Hebrew, using rhyme and meter popular in Arabic. But I'm an American Jewish historian, so let's focus on the immigrants who came to the United States, first from Central Europe in the 19th century. There were only about 2,500 Jews in the United States in 1820, 0.1% of the population. But by 1880, there were 250,000 Jews here. They faced important challenges as they sought to preserve Judaism and transmit Jewish identity to the next generation. These challenges, they needed to figure out how to address them, not only because they were few in number, but also, if we think about it, the United States was a very young country. It had very few established Jewish communal institutions to support Judaism, Jewish life, and Jewish learning. They needed mechanisms to support individual Jews in need. How did they do all of that? Most importantly, they had the will. They figured it out because they wanted to. They wanted to maintain Judaism and connect with other Jews. And so they figured out how to do that. I think of the many men who came here in their youth in the early part of the 19th century. They established most of the Jewish communities in the nation's heartland and in the South, and they gradually took over Sephardic communities in the port cities. Most began as peddlers. It's an easy occupation if you don't know the language and have little, if any, capital. You can just put some stuff in a bag and go out into the hinterland and find an eager audience for things like safety pins and knives and other kinds of utensils essential for life on a farm. Jews were lonely when they arrived here, so they sought each other out, often in a boarding house where they gathered at the end of a long week of peddling. They enjoyed each other's company and grew to rely on one another. They lent each other money or goods to sell, and their bonds deepened. Their Jewishness deepened also, often beginning around August, when someone would remark, "Hey, I think the high holidays must be approaching. Any one of you know how to lead the group in prayer?" These ordinary Jews decided what American Jewish life would look like. Jewish communal life sprang out of their unselfconscious needs for economic security, for support in times of personal crisis, for friendship, for Jewish community. Over time, they established their institutions from the bottom up so that they could ensure Jewish continuity. Synagogues, Jewish clubs, Jewish schools. They passed on their ethnic and religious identity to their children through a combination of innovation and commitment in an American Jewish community in an American way, based on voluntarism, pluralism, and freedom. Among the most important vehicles for binding Jews together were Jewish newspapers, which helped break down localism, unite Jews, and stimulate Jewish pride. So I'd like to look together with you at the stirring words of one of these readers. I think are we gonna share the screen here? Great, thank you. This is a letter that was written by Isaac Jelinek, as you can see. He's writing to Isaac Gleiser, who lived in Baltimore. He was the editor of the Occident, one of the early Jewish newspapers. And I've just cleaned it up because the spelling is was so idiosyncratic that it would have been a little hard to read. So he writes, "It will surprise you, sir, to hear from such a remote part of the frontier of Texas. I'm sorry to say I'm a poor scholar. I cannot express my feeling with the pen when I accidentally came in possession of such valuable information as contained in your valuable newspaper. May the living God spare you that you may accomplish what you have undertaken to do. I'm sorry to say I was ignorant what was going on, although I'm in this country 15 years. I'm happy, very happy indeed, to see that our true religion has a public advocate. I cannot find words to express my feelings. You can put me on your list of subscribers. I would like to send you the pay in advance, but here we cannot obtain paper money when we please, and I live a long ways from the coast. As soon as I obtain paper money, I will remit it to you. I hope you will believe me to be a true Jew and a friend to our cause." Okay, great. When I think of this lone Jew in Texas, hearing the joy and pride and gratitude in his words, I think it gives you a small taste of what ordinary Jews felt like at the time and how important it was for them to establish connections with other Jews. It's not unlike what many of us feel during the pandemic, where the internet, like the newspaper of the 19th century, can provide a sense of connection, belonging when we are isolated in our homes. The next text I'd like us to look at is a text from that tells us a little bit about Rebecca Gratz. So Rebecca Gratz from Philadelphia lived her entire life, adult life in Philadelphia. She was the seventh daughter of a upper-class American Jewish family and probably the foremost American Jewish woman in the 19th century. She was the first woman to create an independent Jewish women's organization in America. And then it was a benevolent society to take care of Jews who needed assistance, many of whom were widows. She also helped mold American Judaism as it took place in the earliest days of the Republic. Given the intensity of missionary activity at the time, she realized that providing sustenance to less fortunate Jews and Jewish families was not enough because given the intense missionary activity at the time, there was concern that Jews who had fallen on hard times would be susceptible to missionary activity, to conversion, to attempts to convert them to Christianity. And she felt that the best way to counter that was to establish a Hebrew Sunday school for Jewish children. And so she established the first Sunday school in 1838 by adapting what was then the popular Christian Sunday school model. You have to, again, remember the times that we are living in. At that point, there was no Hebrew, there was no Jewish Bible. And there was not yet a Jewish Siddur. They would have called it a hymnal during those times. Most Jews did not know Hebrew at this period. So it's very likely that the knowledge of the teachers was limited too. As you will see, as we look at this text together, she improvised. Rosa Mordecai was one of the students in the school, and so she is later on in life wrote these reflections of her time in the Hebrew school. The instruction must have been principally oral in those primitive days. Miss Gratz always began school with the prayer, opening with, "Come, ye children, hearken unto me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord." This was followed by a prayer of her own composition, which she read verse by verse, and the whole school repeated after her. Then she read a chapter of the Bible in a clear and distinct voice, without any elocution, and this could be heard and understood all over the room. The closing exercises were equally simple. A Hebrew hymn sung by the children, then one of Watts' simple verses. Watts was an English minister who was a prolific writer of hymns, whose rhythm the smallest child could easily catch as all repeated, "Send me the voice of that Samuel heard," etc., etc. Many old scholars can still recall the question, "Who formed you, child, and made you live?" And the answer, "God did my life and spirit give." The first lines of the admirable Pike's Catechism, which was one of the earliest Jewish catechisms composed clearly on the model of Christian catechisms. And I believe, right, that it was the first book for that purpose. The scripture lessons were taught from a little illustrated work published by the Christian Sunday School Union. Many a long summer's day have I spent pasting pieces of paper over answers unsuitable for Jewish children. And many were the fruitless efforts of those children to read through over or under the lines. So you see what she's doing here. In order to be able to teach without the right materials, she's taking a Christian Bible, pasting over the New Testament and using the Bible as best she can to teach Jewish children. The annual examination was held about Purim time. Can any of you recall the dear old Cherry Street Synagogue on those March days? It was with something like awe that on these anniversaries, we women took possession of the ground floor. So if you think about it, right, the synagogue was one room that had a balcony for the women, and the men were on the main floor. So she's clearly recalling that once a year, the women got onto the ground floor to conduct these examinations for the school. A small table was placed in front of the reading desk for Miss Gratz. The classes were all arranged in the men's seats and were called up to stand and recite by Mr. Abraham Hart, who presided at the desk. His own clever children invariably making the best recitations and carrying off the prizes. The classes were arranged in a semicircle according to the part of the book they studied, the pupils returning to their seats when the limit of their lessons had been reached. One teacher stood in the center, giving the questions, or if the classes were numerous, walked around gradually around the circle. Thus, every child was really examined and each book recited in whole or in part. The monotony was varied by monologues and dialogues. Then came the distribution of prizes, which were given out by Mr. Hart, giving the name of the teacher with the 3 best scholars. The first prize was always a Bible, or rather a Bible and 2 books were given to each class. These books were most carefully selected by Miss Gratz herself and handed to her by her to each child with a kind, encouraging word, often with a written line on the flyleaf. As the happy children went out orderly by class through the back door, each was given an orange and a pretzel. What do we learn from this testimony to life in a Sunday school in the mid-19th century? Even then, they understood that one of the most important things we can do to transmit Judaism is to do it lovingly, to make it fun, to have some sweets on hand, to associate Jewish learning with sweetness, to take popular Christian forms and adapt them. And if you don't have the text, you improvise. You do what you can with what you have. By doing this, she helped Jewish children resist conversionary efforts and grow up as proud Jews. Her Sunday school model was replicated all over the country, magnifying its impact on Jewish children and providing meaningful work and training for Jewish women. The creativity and determination that Jews and many others exhibited as they built up Jewish life in the United States is something we benefit from every day, even 2 centuries later. There are so many examples we can look at. One only has to recall the enormous reserves of resilience of Holocaust survivors who rebuilt their lives and their souls in the decades after the war, and in doing so, enriched Judaism in America and Jewish life immeasurably. It's this resilience that is built into our DNA as Jews that has proven to be essential yet again during the challenging months of this pandemic. As Jews in now 2021, we have so much to draw on to sustain us, so much that our predecessors lacked. Jewish law, Jewish lore, Jewish history, Jewish thought, Jewish literature, an embarrassment of riches in terms of books of Jewish content and materials that we can access on the internet. One example of how to build on our traditions to draw out new meaning for today that I find particularly poignant is this prayer that you have on your screen. We know that early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of messaging to wash your hands for 20 seconds. And I don't know about you, but I thought, okay, 20 seconds, that's short. I can do that. But when you actually start washing your hands for 20 seconds, it suddenly feels like it's 5 minutes. So I thought that this was a really brilliant idea. Rabbi Joseph Mesler, who developed a prayer that lasts for 20 seconds when you recite it, and really makes the act not only an opportunity to really stick it out for 20 minutes, but is also sanctifying, an act that we as Jews know well. Hand washing plays such an important role in Jewish life. We know we wash our hands ritually before we break bread, and it's a way for us Jews of signifying that eating is a privilege, just like the sacrificial rituals in the temple, and that we ought to approach each meal with gratitude and reverence. And I think in this pandemic, each time we wash our hands and are able to maintain our health, and hopefully by so doing, help ensure the health of others, that too is a privilege. He wrote, "As I take up my hands and wash them and reassure my heart, I pray for healing and wholeness for the whole world. I remember that every life is unique and of infinite value, from those living on the most remote part of the globe to those in our cities, to our neighbors and family members. Let me use my hands for good, to help bring love and compassion to others. Let us lift up our hearts and hands to the eternal." Similarly, religious leaders have found ways to tie the new to the old. It has been absolutely inspiring to witness the intense work of the conservative movement's Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which has really was determined right from the start to issue new responsa to urgently address the new circumstances that we found ourselves in. It really began already as we began to think about Passover. How were we going to have a Seder when we were each in our own homes by ourselves? How were we going to come together? What instruments could we use? And rabbis really began to grapple with, what does it mean to be on Zoom on Shabbat? How can we make use of technology in ways that enrich our lives as Jews, and do so in a way that is consistent with our Jewish values and our understandings of Jewish law? We had to learn how to offer comfort to mourners when we could not be with them during Shiva. I'm sure you, as I, have confronted that many times over the past 10 months. What is the best way to really be there for others whom we love, who are grieving? And most recently, the rabbis issued a responsa on the issue of vaccination. Conservative rabbis have guided us on these issues and more And in many ways, while we see this across the Jewish spectrum, I think conservative rabbis have been really uniquely positioned to fill this role, because we know that conservative Judaism has long been committed to serious engagement with Jewish law and custom, and also to ensuring that Judaism speak to the needs of Jews in every era. So we have now two prayers. The first is a prayer of hope during the pandemic by Rabbi Naomi Levy, and the second, a more recent prayer that she wrote about a prayer to be recited when receiving the vaccine. So the first, we are frightened, God, worried for our loved ones, worried for our world, helpless and confused. We turn to you, seeking comfort, faith, and hope. Teach us, God, to turn our panic into patience and our fear into acts of kindness and support. Our strong must watch out for our weak. Our young must take care of our old. Help each one of us to do our part to halt the spread of this virus. Send strength and courage to the doctors and nurses in the front lines of this battle. Fortify them with the full force of their healing powers. Send wisdom and insights to the scientists working day and night across the world to discover healing treatments. Bless their efforts, God. Fill our leaders with the wisdom and the courage to choose wisely and act quickly. Help us, God, to see that we are one world, one people who will rise above this pandemic together. Send us health, God. Watch over us. Grace us with your love. Bless us with your healing light. Hear us, God. Heal us, God. Amen. We know that we have so much of our fixed liturgy, and so much of that can feel appropriate to this moment. But Rabbi Levy and others have done a wonderful job of also doing what Jews have done throughout the millennia as well, which is to compose spontaneous prayers that speak from our hearts and from our souls to the needs of the day. So upon receiving the vaccine, one might recite the Shehechayanu prayer. One might recite the prayer Hatov v'Hametiv, God that brings goodness into the world. And here is what Naomi Levy wrote in her own words. I've been praying for this day, and now it is here. With great excitement, a touch of trepidation, and with deep gratitude, I give thanks to all the scientists who toil day and night so that I might receive this tiny vaccination that will protect me and all souls around this world. With the pandemic still raging, I am blessed to do my part to defeat it. Let this be the beginning of a new day, a new time of hope, of joy, and of freedom, and most of all, of health. I thank you, God, for blessing me with this life, for sustaining me, and for enabling me to reach this awe-filled moment. The impulse for finding religious responses to the challenges of the day is crucial to the evolution of Judaism and of Jewish life. And we see the benefits of this during the pandemic. You know, we Jews could so easily have said, we're in the midst of a catastrophic moment. I don't really have time to think about Judaism right now. I need to figure out how I'm going to get food delivered, how we're going to get toilet paper, how I'm going to stay connected. Young parents could easily have said, I got to figure out how I'm going to be working from home and having children that need attention on their Zoom classes. I can't really cope. I can't think about Judaism. I'll think about Judaism when the pandemic is over. But that's not what happened. Jews, on the contrary, have been hungry for connection, hungry to make meaning out of this moment in our lives that it's just difficult to fathom. And so we see this tremendous explosion of creativity. Part of that comes from prayers, as we've been looking at, but there are other ways as well. And probably we don't need to share the screen anymore. So I think that's great. Okay. So if we think about today, just find my notes here. I think about what's been happening over the past months, the ways in which the inventiveness of our leaders has transformed the way we think about what is possible in Jewish life. Think back to the creative Zoom Pesach Sidarim, the many different models of Zoom live stream, outdoor, hybrid religious services for the high holidays, for daily minyan, and for Shabbat, or the creative sing-alongs, Hanukkah menorah building competitions, drive-by sufganiyot or latke pickups. It is astonishing to me what rabbis and Jewish educators and chazanim have been able to achieve, and I really stand in awe of their talent and of their commitment, really, to provide and respond to the needs of Jews all over the country, and in many cases all over the world. I think of one particular example that was especially meaningful to me because one of my colleagues, a younger faculty member at JTS, was getting married over the summer. And, I guess last year at this time, she was sharing her wedding plans excitedly. But as January turned to March, turned to May, she realized that they would have to completely change their thinking about what kind of wedding she and her intended would have. And so, of course, it was a Zoom wedding. There were maybe 20 close family members in a backyard with her. And I was so touched by a particular ritual that she and her fiance really invented that demonstrated to me brilliantly how to find new meaning for today in age-old customs. We know the custom of the badekin, the custom of a groom veiling his bride just prior to the start of a Jewish wedding ceremony. We know that it stems from the passage in Genesis that recounts when Rebekah gazed upon Isaac for the first time. The word comes from the root that means to check or to confirm, and drawn from the story of Jacob's wedding, when he learns only after the ceremony that the veiled bride he married was Leah and not his beloved Rachel. So the custom has very old roots, and it serves as a sign of trust and honesty. How to build on those sentiments in an egalitarian fashion in the midst of a pandemic? This couple, when we saw them on the Zoom, they were both wearing bandanas over their mouths and noses. So that they removed their bandanas. The groom then covered the nose, mouth, and chin of his soon-to-be wife with a white silk mask. She then covered him with a more whimsical mask designed to resemble a man's tuxedo. What better way to honor an age-old tradition of veiling in the age of this pandemic than by finding the sacred in the donning of a mask, which in this moment can protect the lives of one's loved one and of others as well. And speaking personally, I learned the power inherent in marking celebratory moments this fall when I was privileged to uh, have a new grandchild, a new grandson, and I served as the sandik for my grandson's bris. It was an awesome moment in the truest sense of the word. We were so sad not to be surrounded by our family and friends and my daughter and son-in-law's synagogue community, but the religious intensity of the moment was deep and intense with only 10 of us present. There was a deep closeness in this minimalist Brit Milah, and I am told that the intimacy was palpable even on the Zoom. One could hear a pin drop as everyone mentally focused on the newborn, waiting for the sound of the rabbi's blessings that would signal the completion of the ritual. Thankfully, Jews and Judaism possess the reserves necessary to flourish on many levels at once. This pandemic will undoubtedly lead us to new theological responses as Jews as we strive to make sense of this tragedy. Halachic decisors will continue to respond to unique challenges posed by this moment. And all of us will need to figure out what we can learn from this moment. How can we build on what we've learned to reimagine community, tefillah, religious school, youth activities, fundraising, and more? We'll have to see which innovations remain and which will fade. Only time will tell. Thanks to our rich tradition, we'll be able to rediscover old but wise answers to new questions and new answers to old ones. We'll revive tried and true coping mechanisms and we'll adopt new initiatives. All of these techniques will be necessary. It's what Jews have always done. It accounts for Judaism's richness and the power of Jews to ensure that Judaism always remain responsive to their needs. As we turn the page in the calendar, 2021, I offer a blessing that we recognize and appreciate the power of our tradition to nourish us during this dark moment and to challenge us to realize our best selves in ways that will positively impact our loved ones, our Jewish communities, our society at large, and our world. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it come to pass.
Thank you, Chancellor, for that very, very informative and inspiring presentation. And thank you, Rabbi Siegel, for that very, very warm welcome that you gave to the Chancellor. It was certainly very, very words of that really were inspiring as well. I'm scanning, I don't see anything in the chat right now. I'm scanning the screens to see if anybody has a question. And I see one from Serenay Newman. Serenay, please unmute yourself. Serenay, you look a little different, but that's okay. Why don't you just, there she is. Okay.
I am
Serenay's husband.
my better half, my good partner.
Okay.
We can debate that. I'm sure everybody would love to have to step into that discussion. Anyway, my name is Neil Newman. I am a retired chazan, and my wife and I are here 12 years in Sarasota. But the only reason I wanted to just relate to your presentation is that I'm a graduate. I have a Bachelor of Hebrew Literature from Gratz College in Philadelphia. That was a part of your presentation. And I felt really proud of the work that I did at Gratz and proud of that institution. And I want to say that I finished my BHL with credits at the seminary, at the TI at that time, Teachers Institute. And in fact, I lived across the street at the Juilliard Apartments. I didn't know that I had that, I shared that common experience with Rabbi Siegel that he had a little bit later than I did. But a lot of memories of the subway coming out from underground right at our particular apartment. But I had very, very fond memories also of the seminary, and of course lived across the street during my studies at the seminary and my cantorial studies at Hebrew Union College in New York City. So there.
Thank you.
It's slightly, just slightly.
I'm looking around some more to see if there are any hands raised. Rabbi Siegel, you can jump in with a question if you'd like. You know, we're not exclusive here. This is a very warm and welcoming synagogue, so you feel free to chime in.
I'm going to hold off for a moment, but I see Evie Mitchell has her hand up.
Okay, I didn't see that. Oh, Evie, go right ahead and unmute. And
I don't have a question, but I do want to remind everybody that the fundraiser for Torah Fund this year, which helps support Jewish Theological Seminary, will be about a month from now, Wednesday, February 17th at 6:30 p.m. And we are going to have, and Rabbi, Shuly, you may know this, may have been one of your former students, Rabbi Shira Walla is going to be our speaker, and she will be speaking on Esther, the unlikely heroine of Shushan.
She's terrific. You won't want to miss it.
thank you, Evie. Yes, Lois.
I just want to chime in that as a Philadelphian, I too have connections with Gratz College. And I remember when you were at Beth Shalom down in Philadelphia, though we were not members of that congregation. My daughter is the immediate past chairman of the board of Gratz College. My children were educated there. It was a superb institution. And though one of my daughters has a doctorate, which she got from JTS, and the other one is a lawyer, they still say that Gratz was the highlight of their educational career with the wonderful faculty that was there. But just as a little aside, you talked about Rebecca Gratz. That charity that she started is still available. Its unique quality is that the women who now work on it accept no payment. There is no overhead. Every penny that is donated goes to the recipient. So thank you for raising that. As an ex-Philadelphian, you're making me feel good.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Are you Sharon's mother?
Yes, indeed I am. And she's going to be very embarrassed that she's not here today, but she had a class that in conflict.
I understand. Please send my warm regards.
Will do. Thank you.
I see a hand is raised from Denise N. So Denise N, please unmute yourself and jump on in.
Hello. Hello. I just wanted to thank the Chancellor for adding the personal aspect to the history of my husband's family, who came from Russia as a trader and traveled cross country, first settling in the Omaha area and then making their way to Cheyenne, Wyoming, to join a very small community there that grew over the years. But to think that there were actually Orthodox Jews in Cheyenne, Wyoming was quite a step. The Texas story reminded me of that you shared. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Hi. This is Joyce Poditz, Joyce and Frank Poditz. We were members of Beth Shalom. We still are members of Beth Shalom when your wonderful husband was our rabbi. And we thank you so much for that. I believe that our daughter's wedding was his first wedding. actually there. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so. I'm pretty sure it was. So thank you for your lecture. It was terrific. We both really enjoyed it. And I am Shelley Dorff's sister, so regards from him as well. All kinds of connections.
Thank you.
By the way, just to jump in, this is news to Shelley named my second. Shelley named my first daughter, Ronit, in Los Angeles in 1974.
Very nice. Very nice.
Wow.
You have the same smile.
Wow.
Well, let me scan again, scan around. I'm looking for some more hands. I don't see any more hands. So with that, I will turn, Rabbi Siegel, you said you wanted to jump on in.
Yeah, I just want to, the seminary, of course, means a great deal to all of us who had the privilege, and I considered it a privilege and an honor to attend there. But for a lot of people around the country and those who don't live in the New York area, they hear about the seminary. But how does the seminary reach out and educationally to communities like Sarasota?
Well, thanks for asking. The most important thing that we do at JTS is train all different kinds of Jewish leaders so that you can have wonderful rabbis like Rabbi Siegel. And you undoubtedly know that we train rabbis, but we also train chazanim and Jewish educators, Jewish communal professionals, academics of Jewish studies in universities, and our undergrads are the lay leaders of the Jewish community as they take their roles out there in many different careers, but are often the chairs of the board of the preschool or the day school or the Ramah in their local area, and playing important roles in Federation and so many other Jewish institutions in a lay capacity. In addition to our training the leaders that then impact the Jewish community really all over North America and beyond. We have a very hefty alumni group in Israel as well, as you can imagine. But we do, through, for example, our Davidson School, we are then training, we are raising the standards of Jewish education in religious schools and in Jewish day schools and early childhood education. We also have our public teaching. I hope that you are taking advantage of the enhanced public teaching that we've been able to offer during the pandemic. The quality of teaching of our faculty that is now available to people all over the world, and we've greatly increased our numbers. And if you haven't been treated to that kind of learning until now, I hope that you will check it out.
Thank you. That was a great question, a great answer. So before I turn the program over to our president, I'd like to thank Carolyn Cantor for providing me such a screen share material in such an easy to work with format that really made life easy for me. And once again, thank you to Elliot and Joel, our technical directors, Al Tridell, for organizing this again. Reminders about Rabbi Siegel's classes on Tuesday and Wednesday, and the program that Al Tridell has planned for next Wednesday and Thursday. And just one other thing, we're a program which hasn't been mentioned, and usually I don't give plugs for sisterhood because I'm not quite a member of the sisterhood yet. But there was a lot of Jewish geography that was going on just a few minutes ago, and the sisterhood, I just found out, is having a little Jewish geography Zoom on Sunday the 31st. So that sounds like fun. So without any further words from me, I will turn this program over to Dr. Eric Faber for concluding remarks. And thank you everybody for attending.
Good afternoon, Chancellor Schwartz. On behalf of the Temple Beth Shalom Board of Directors and Congregation, I'd like to extend also a very warm welcome to you. So welcome to Sarasota. We also welcome Carolyn Cantor and Linda Fisk. It's great to have you with us as well. Today, we were extremely honored and privileged to have you address us, and also doubly honored because I believe you are this is your first occasion as Chancellor to address the Jewish community on the west coast of Florida. Your presentation today was especially relevant in this time of the pandemic, both on a local and national level. And so the beauty and eloquence of your presentation came across very clearly. In the words of Lord Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory, who was the chief rabbi of the conservative movement in Britain, community is society with a human face, the place where we know we're not alone. And you so beautifully and eloquently explained and described how we as a Jewish community can stay together. So we thank you for all of your insights and the beautiful prayers which you shared with us, and also the history of the Jewish community in Philadelphia and elsewhere. Incidentally, my wife and I are also ex-Philadelphians, but you wouldn't know from our accent. But we thank you for your beautiful and eloquent presentation. So we wish you continued success, Chancellor Schwartz, and hope in the future we will have the opportunity to have you visit us again. Thank you so much. And thank you to all who attended today. Thank you.
Thank you all. I hope to be able to see you all in person as well.
Oh, please do, Chancellor. It's beautiful down here. This really is paradise, and this is a great synagogue to hang with when you get here. So, without any further comments, I will close the meeting and thank everybody once again for attending, and thanks to all the participants as well as those people who asked questions. And please, everybody, be safe, especially in these closing days when we're so close to the finish line. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.